He had it all: luxury cars, designer clothes, and thousands in cash at his fingertips. His life was one big, never-ending party, all funded by the woman who loved him more than anything, his mother. But when she finally said, enough, when she cut off the money, the cars, the privilege, her own son made a decision so cold, so heartless, that it left an entire community in shock. This wasn't just another case of a spoiled kid acting out. No, this was something far darker. A story of entitlement, greed, and betrayal so twisted that even seasoned investigators were left stunned. A mother who gave everything, and a son who believed it still wasn't enough. What could drive someone to commit the ultimate act of violence against the person who sacrificed everything for them? And when the truth finally came out, how did he react? With remorse? Or with something far more disturbing? Before we dive into this chilling case, make sure to like this video and subscribe, because trust me, you won't believe how this one ends. Raquel Merritt had built a life most could only dream of. A self-made real estate investor in Houston, she was known not just for her business success but for her generosity. She gave back to her community, helped struggling families find homes, and ensured her only son never wanted for anything. She had worked tirelessly to create the kind of life she never had growing up, and for years, it seemed like her sacrifices had paid off. But beneath the surface of that picture-perfect success, a storm was brewing. Her son, 19 years old Tavian, better known as Tay, was the kind of young man who had never heard the word no. He had never worked a single day in his life, yet he walked around in designer clothes, flashed stacks of cash, and drove a brand new Dodge Charger before he was even old enough to drink. His friends envied him, strangers assumed he was some kind of underground kingpin, but the truth was far less impressive. Everything he had, every dollar he spent, came from his mother. And while most would be grateful, Tay saw it differently. He didn't see it as a privilege, he saw it as his right. Tay's reckless lifestyle was no secret. Drugs, gambling, women, his days were a blur of parties and his nights spent throwing money around as if it would never run out. And for years, Raquel had turned a blind eye. She ignored the warnings from teachers, the calls from the police, the concerned whispers from friends and family. She had bailed him out, literally and financially, over and over again. Expelled from multiple schools, arrested for petty crimes, and building a reputation as an arrogant menace, Tay had been given chance after chance. And every time, Raquel hoped it would be the last. But there comes a moment when even a mother's love reaches its breaking point. For Raquel, that moment came after one reckless weekend. Tay, as usual, had been out with his crew, gambling in an underground dice game, and he had lost big. Thousands of dollars gone in just a few hours. But instead of learning from his mistakes, he did what he always did, he went to his mother and demanded more. $3,000. That was his usual weekly allowance. Enough to keep him in the fast life, enough to keep up appearances. And he expected it, like clockwork. But this time, for the first time, Raquel said no. She told him it was time he learned responsibility, time he figured out how to stand on his own 2 feet. She wasn't going to keep funding his destruction. She expected him to be angry. She expected him to argue, maybe even disappear for a few days in protest. But what she never expected, was just how far her own son was willing to go to prove her wrong. "You lion. You trying to embarrass me," Tay scoffed, his voice thick with entitlement. He stood in the middle of the kitchen, arms crossed, his face twisted in disbelief. "You ain't cuttin' me off. I'm yo, son." Raquel met his glare, her expression unwavering. For years, she had given him everything, money, shelter, endless second chances. But now, she was done. "Tay, you need to grow up," she said firmly. "I won't keep funding your destruction. You want to live reckless? Do it on your own dime." Tay's hands balled into fists. His mother, his own mother, was standing there, looking down at him like he was some broke nobody. She wasn't just refusing him money, she was stripping him of his power, his status. Without her, who was he? His so-called friends wouldn't stick around if the cash stopped flowing. He felt his chest tighten with rage. So that's it? You just gone, leave me out here looking stupid? Raquel shook her head, exhaling deeply. No, Tay. I'm giving you a chance to be a man. That was the last thing he wanted to hear. The word man meant nothing to him if it didn't come with money, control, and respect. And right now, he felt like she was taking all of that away. The anger that had been simmering beneath the surface for years finally boiled over. Before Raquel could react, Tay lunged. His fist collided with her face, sending her stumbling backward. The sharp edge of the marble countertop caught her lower back as she fell, a pained gasp escaping her lips. The room spun as she tried to push herself up, but Tay was already on her. He stomped down on her face, his sneaker smashing into her nose with a sickening crunch. A piercing scream left her throat, but it was cut short by another vicious stomp, then another. Blood gushed from her broken nose, spilling onto the pristine white tiles, painting them deep red. Her body convulsed, trying to curl inward to protect itself, but Tay wasn't finished. He grabbed a chair from the dining table, his breaths ragged, his vision clouded with fury. Lifting it high above his head, he swung it down with all his strength. The wooden legs shattered against her ribs, the sickening sound of bones cracking beneath the impact. Raquel let out a weak moan, barely conscious, her body twitching with the last remnants of life. She tried to crawl away, her bloodied fingers leaving streaks across the floor. Her lips trembled as she whispered, "Tay, please." But her son had already made up his mind. Stepping over her battered body, he disappeared down the hallway, his heavy footsteps echoing in the silent house. Moments later, he returned, gripping his illegal Glock 19, his knuckles white against the handle. He towered over his mother, watching as her broken body struggled to draw breath. There was no hesitation. No remorse. Bang! The first bullet tore into her chest. Her body jerked violently. Bang! The second shot made her go still. Bang! The third ended it. Silence fell over the house, except for the shallow, gurgling sounds of her final breaths. Tay stared down at her, his mother, the woman who had given him everything, his lip curled in disgust. He didn't look back. He didn't hesitate. As he walked out of that house, his mother's blood still warm on the floor behind him, his heart didn't race with panic or regret. No, he felt something else entirely. Relief. He slid into the driver's seat of the Mercedes G-Wagon, the leather still carrying the faint scent of his mother's perfume. He smirked as he gripped the wheel, revving the engine before peeling out of the driveway, tires screeching against the pavement. Before he even hit the freeway, he reached into his mother's designer purse, the one she always kept on the kitchen counter. He already knew it would be filled with cash. Raquel never carried less than a few thousand. He pulled out a thick wad of $100 bills and flipped through it with one hand, nodding in satisfaction. This is mine now. Less than 2 hours after murdering his mother in cold blood, Tay was in the VIP section of one of Houston's hottest nightclubs, surrounded by women who had no idea they were partying with a killer. He popped bottles, flashing expensive liquor to the cameras, stacks of cash spread out on the table like playing cards. He was laughing, throwing money in the air, living like nothing had happened. And then came the video. The one that would later send shockwaves through social media. Tay, grinning ear to ear, leaned into the camera, his diamond-studded grille flashing under the club's neon lights. With a bottle of champagne in one hand and a stack of bills in the other, he scoffed, "Told her I run this shit." He had no idea that while he was flexing for the internet, his world was about to come crashing down. Back at the house, Raquel's sister, Saad, was growing anxious. Her calls had gone unanswered all day. That wasn't like Raquel. She was always busy, but she always responded, especially when it came to family. The silence gnawed at her, a tight knot forming in her stomach. By evening, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Saad grabbed her keys and drove straight to her sister's house, mentally preparing herself to curse Raquel out for not picking up the damn phone. But the second she pulled into the driveway, something felt off. The house was dark. Too dark. The front door was slightly ajar. Her heartbeat quickened as she stepped inside, calling out, "Raquel. You here?" No answer. Then she saw it, the first thing her eyes locked onto, the blood. Dark red stains smeared across the white marble floor, trailing toward the kitchen. Her breath caught in her throat as she stepped forward, her body trembling. And then she saw her. Raquel lay motionless in a pool of her own blood, her once beautiful face swollen and unrecognizable. Shell casings glistened on the floor nearby. The air was thick with the metallic scent of death. Sada's knees buckled. A gut-wrenching scream tore from her throat as she rushed to her sister's side, shaking her, pleading, "No, no, no. Wake up." But there was no waking up. Raquel was gone. Through her sobs, she fumbled for her phone, her fingers barely able to dial. The moment the 911 operator picked up, her voice was raw with hysteria. "Please. My sister, she's been shot. There's blood everywhere. Please send someone, please." As the dispatcher tried to calm her, Sada's mind was already racing, piecing together the only thing that made sense. Tay. She had seen the warning signs. The entitlement. The rage. The way he treated Raquel like an ATM instead of a mother. And now, standing in the middle of this nightmare, she knew. The golden boy, the spoiled prince, had finally shown the monster he truly was. The moment detectives stepped into Raquel Merritt's blood-soaked home, they already had a prime suspect. Her son. The scene told a brutal story. Raquel hadn't just been shot. She had been beaten, stomped, humiliated. This wasn't a random burglary gone wrong. This was personal. Rage-fueled. And there was only one person who had a motive twisted enough to do something like this. Tay. But where was he? The answer wasn't hard to find. Detectives barely had to do any real digging before the evidence started piling up. Tay had been sloppy, arrogant, and completely unbothered. While his mother's body lay cold on the kitchen floor, he had been out flashing money, flexing for the cameras, as if he had just won the lottery instead of committing cold-blooded murder. The moment the police got a hold of his social media accounts, they couldn't believe what they were seeing. Tay had practically confessed online. In one video, he was laughing in the VIP section of a Houston club, throwing $100 bills at the camera. In another, he leaned in with that cocky, twisted grin and said it himself, "Told her I run this shit." That was all they needed. Within hours, a warrant was issued for his arrest. But Tay had already vanished. He had left Houston, leaving behind nothing but his mother's stolen luxury car, abandoned in a parking lot. But the police weren't playing games. They didn't just want Tay, they wanted him now. The U.S. Marshals were brought in, and the nationwide manhunt began. For days, law enforcement tracked every move he made, piecing together his getaway through witness statements, surveillance footage, and digital breadcrumbs he was too careless to cover. His phone had pinged in multiple states, leading them straight to his last known location. Atlanta. Tay wasn't hiding. Not really. He wasn't in some dark alley, living off scraps, terrified of getting caught. No. He was partying. Living like a king. Authorities tracked him to a rented Airbnb in one of Atlanta's wealthier districts. When they breached the house, they found exactly what they expected: Tay, lying back on an expensive leather couch, surrounded by half-naked women and enough drugs to make a cartel jealous. And the most chilling part? When they stormed in, weapons drawn, Tay didn't flinch. He didn't panic. He didn't even try to run. Instead, he just grinned. As if it were all one big joke. Even as they cuffed him, even as they read him his rights, he kept that same cocky smirk, like the entire world was still his playground. But the game was over. And this time, there was no one left to bail him out. The courtroom was packed. Every seat filled. Every eye locked onto the young man sitting at the defendant's table, dressed in an expensive suit like he was attending some high-profile event rather than his own murder trial. Tay Merritt showed no emotion, no fear, no guilt. Just the same smug arrogance he had carried from the moment he was arrested. But this time, there was no VIP section. No designer clothes. No endless flow of cash. This time, he wasn't the one in control. The prosecution wasted no time tearing him apart. They painted him as a heartless sociopath, a young man who had been given everything but still wanted more. They laid out the evidence in excruciating detail, forcing the jury to relive every moment of Raquel Merritt's brutal final minutes. They played the 911 call, where her sister's voice cracked with agony as she found her lifeless body. They showed crime scene photos, the blood, the broken bones, the shell casings scattered across the kitchen floor. Then, they showed him the videos. The social media posts. There was Tay, just hours after the murder, flashing stacks of cash, popping bottles in the club, laughing, grinning, living his best life while his mother's body lay cold on the floor of the home she had built for him. And then they played that clip. The one that made the entire courtroom go silent. Told her as I run this shit. His own words. His own voice. The jury didn't flinch. The judge's expression darkened. Even the spectators, some of them hardened reporters who had covered crime for years, looked physically sick. Tay sat there, arms crossed, as if none of it mattered. As if he were untouchable. The defense scrambled to paint a different picture. They tried to frame him as a troubled young man, claiming he had been overwhelmed by pressure, that he had snapped in a moment of weakness. But there was no weakness in what he had done. No moment of regret. No hint of sorrow. The jury saw it. And they didn't need long to decide. Less than 3 hours. That's all it took. When they returned, the courtroom was silent. Tay sat there, still as a statue, waiting. The verdict was read. Guilty. First-degree murder. Aggravated assault. Unlawful possession of a firearm. And then came the sentencing. The judge, an older man with sharp eyes and a voice heavy with disgust, didn't hold back. You are the embodiment of greed, entitlement, and cruelty, he said, his voice echoing through the chamber. Your mother gave you everything, and you repaid her with death. You are beyond redemption. Then came the final blow. I sentence you to life in prison without the possibility of parole. No escape. No second chances. For the first time, a flicker of something crossed Tay's face. Annoyance. Frustration. But not remorse. Never remorse. As the bailiffs approached, he leaned back in his chair, smirked, and shook his head. Man, y'all got me fucked up. Even as he was led away in shackles, even as the doors closed behind him, Tay still believed he was untouchable. But the world had moved on. And now, he was just another inmate. Another forgotten name in a prison system that had swallowed men just like him for decades. No more money. No more power. No more freedom. Just an empty cell and a lifetime to think about the mother he so easily threw away. Prison was nothing like the world Tay Merritt had known. No designer clothes. No flashy cars. No endless cash. Just cold steel bars, concrete walls, and men who had seen, and done, far worse than he could ever imagine. But even here, in a place where survival meant everything, Tay still thought he was untouchable. At first, he walked the yard with the same arrogance he carried on the outside, shoulders squared, chin high, flashing his trademark smirk. He bragged openly about his crime, laughing as he told anyone who would listen, "Man, I put my own mama down. Ain't nobody ever put they mama down like me." It wasn't just a confession. It was a flex. A sick, twisted badge of honor. But Tay had no idea what kind of men he was talking to. See, in prison, even killers have a code. Some of the most hardened criminals, men who had committed unspeakable acts, still held one belief sacred: you don't kill your own mother. To them, Tay wasn't a gangster. He wasn't some ruthless boss who had taken out an enemy. He was just a coward. A spoiled, ungrateful brat who murdered the one person who had ever truly loved him. And in a place where respect meant everything, that made him a target. The first few months, the tension simmered beneath the surface. Inmates watched him, whispered about him, sized him up. Then, one night, karma came knocking. It happened in the showers. Tay was alone, humming to himself, when the lights flickered, a split-second warning before the air shifted. He barely had time to turn around before the first blow landed. A sharp, searing pain exploded through his ribs as a shank tore into his flesh. His scream echoed off the tiles, but there was no one coming to help. Fists rained down on him. Feet stomped against his body. Every hit felt personal, fueled by a fury deeper than just prison politics. "That's for yo, mama, bitch." The words hissed through the air before another blade sliced through his shoulder. Tay hit the floor, choking on his own blood, gasping for breath. For the first time in his life, he felt real fear. Not the fear of losing money. Not the fear of being embarrassed. The fear of dying. By the time the guards found him, he was barely conscious. His once pristine face was swollen beyond recognition, his ribs shattered, his body a mangled mess of stab wounds and bruises. He survived. But he would never be the same. The attack sent a clear message: you are not untouchable. Not anymore. From that moment on, Tay Merritt was a ghost. No more cocky strut. No more loudmouth bravado. He spent his days in silence, eyes darting over his shoulder, flinching at every shadow. The spoiled brat who once thought the world revolved around him now lived in constant terror, knowing that at any moment, karma could come back for more. And this time, he might not survive it. Tay Merritt had everything most people could only dream of: wealth, privilege, and endless oh. He wasn't a product of a broken system. His downfall wasn't written in his fate, it was a consequence of his own selfishness. Raquel Merritt had spent years shielding him from the consequences of his actions, hoping that one day he would change. She bailed him out of trouble, gave him chance after chance, and ignored the warning signs until it was too late. But could this tragedy have been prevented? Was Tay always destined to betray the very woman who gave him life? Or did Raquel, in her desperate attempt to give him the world, unknowingly create a monster? It's a question with no easy answers. Some will say that Raquel's biggest mistake was spoiling him, never forcing him to stand on his own 2 feet. Others will argue that some people are simply beyond saving, no matter how much love you pour into them. But one thing is certain: Tay Merritt had everything. And in the end, he threw it all away. Now, instead of living the high life, he wakes up every day in a concrete cell, haunted by the choices that led him there. He thought he was invincible, but karma proved him wrong. And maybe, just maybe, in those long, sleepless nights behind bars, he finally understands the weight of what he did. If this story shocked you, make sure to like this video and subscribe for more real-life cases of betrayal, crime, and justice. Let us know in the comments, was Tay a lost cause from the start, or did his mother's love blind her to the truth?